They say the road reveals who you really are. Strip away the job, the family, the house with the white picket fence, and what's left is raw truth. For Jake Reaper Morrison, that truth had teeth, sharp ones. It was a Tuesday afternoon on Interstate 40, somewhere between nowhere and forgotten, when everything changed. The sun hung low and angry in a burnt orange sky, the kind that makes asphalt shimmer like water. Jake had been riding for 6 hours straight, his Harley-Davidson fat boy growling beneath him like a caged animal finally set free. The leather cut on his back bore the patch of the Iron Skull's MC, a brotherhood he'd bled for, killed for, and would die for without hesitation. Then he saw it. The silver sedan was already spinning when it came into view, a violent pirouette across 3 lanes of highway. Metal screamed. Glass exploded into diamonds against the sun. The car flipped once, twice, then slammed into the concrete barrier with a sound that Jake would hear in his sleep for years to come. Black smoke began curling from the hood like fingers reaching for heaven. Jake's hand squeezed the brake. The Harley protested, fishtailing slightly before settling. Behind his dark sunglasses, his eyes narrowed. He'd seen accidents before, plenty of them. The smart move, the safe move, was to keep riding. Let someone else play hero. Let someone else get involved with cops and questions and complications. But then he heard it, faint, almost lost beneath the highway wind. A child screaming. Jake's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the handlebars until his knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed at him to twist that throttle and disappear into the distance. The Iron Skulls had rules. Stay invisible. Stay moving. Never ever get tangled up with the law. The child screamed again, and Jake Morrison, the man they called Reaper, made a choice that would cost him everything he'd ever known. To understand what happened that day on Interstate 40, you need to understand who Jake was before he became the man in that moment. Jake Morrison wasn't born a biker. He was born in a 2-bedroom apartment in Detroit, to a mother who worked 3 jobs and a father who was gone before Jake learned to walk. He grew up in neighborhoods where the sound of gunshots was as common as birdsong, where survival meant being harder than the world trying to break you. By 16, he was running with street crews. By 18, he'd done his first stint in juvie for assault. By 21, he was looking at serious time. That's when Reaper found him. Not the nickname, the man. Reaper the Elder, they called him, founder and president of the Iron Skulls Motorcycle Club. He was a legend in the underground, a ghost story told in prison yards and dive bars. He saw something in young Jake Morrison that nobody else had bothered to look for. Potential, loyalty, the capacity for controlled violence. The world kicked you down, Reaper told him on that first night, in a garage that smelled like oil and cigarettes. The world told you that you're nothing. But out here on the road with your brothers beside you, you're everything. We don't apologize for who we are. We don't bow. We ride free or we die trying. Jake became Reaper Jr., then just Reaper, after the old man died in a shootout with a rival club 5 years later. He earned his colors through blood and loyalty, rising through the ranks until he wore the vice president patch with pride. The Iron Skulls weren't just a club. They were family. They were purpose. They were the only thing that had ever made sense in Jake's chaotic life. But the life came with rules. Sacred rules. The first rule was simple. The club comes first. Always, before women, before blood family, before conscience. The second rule was survival. Never talk to cops. Never cooperate with the law. The system wasn't built for men like them, so they built their own system, enforced with fists and steel. Jake had lived by those rules for 12 years without question. He'd buried friends who violated them. He'd voted to exile brothers who showed weakness. The code wasn't just words on paper. It was survival. It was identity. But codes are tested when the world stops being theoretical. Jake killed the engine on his Harley and swung his leg over. The highway stretched empty in both directions, a rare moment of isolation on usually crowded asphalt. He approached the wrecked sedan cautiously, his boots crunching on scattered glass. The smoke was thicker now, carrying the acrid smell of burning oil and hot metal. Inside the crumpled vehicle, he could see 2 figures in the front seats, both unmoving. both covered in blood. And in the back, strapped into a car seat, was a little girl. Maybe 4 years old. She was crying so hard she was hiccuping, her face red and streaked with tears. The impact had shattered the rear passenger window, covering her in glittering fragments. A thin line of blood ran from her temple, but her eyes were open, alive, terrified. "Hey," Jake said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Hey, kid, you're okay." She wasn't okay. The car was starting to burn. He could see flames licking at the engine compartment now, hungry and spreading. The doors were crushed. The metal bent inward like a fist had squeezed the car. The front occupants, a man and a woman, probably the girl's parents, weren't moving, weren't breathing. Jake's phone was in his pocket. He could call 911, but making that call meant staying, meant giving statements, meant having his name, his face, his identity entered into police databases. The Iron Skulls had enemies in law enforcement, prosecutors who'd been trying to bring RICO charges against the club for years. Getting involved meant becoming visible, vulnerable. The little girl looked at him with eyes that held no judgment, only fear and hope in equal measure. She reached her small hand toward him through the shattered window. "Please," she whispered, "please help me." And that's when Jake Morrison stopped being Reaper, vice president of the Iron Skulls MC, and became something he'd never been before. A hero. Jake tried the doors first. All jammed. The metal had folded in on itself like wrapping paper, sealing the little girl inside a tomb that was slowly catching fire. He could feel the heat now, radiating from the hood in waves that made the air shimmer. 30 seconds, maybe a minute before the whole thing went up. "Stand back from the window," he told the girl. She obeyed, pressing herself against the opposite door as far as her car seat would allow. Jake wrapped his leather jacket around his fist and punched through the remaining glass, then began clearing the frame, working fast, ignoring the shards that bit into his forearms. The flames were visible now, orange fingers crawling across the dashboard toward the back seat. Behind him, he heard an engine, another car pulling over, a man's voice. "Holy hell, is anyone alive in there?" "Call 911, Jake shouted without turning around. "Now!" He reached through the window, fumbling with the car seat straps. His hands, so steady with a gun or a wrench, shook like leaves. The buckle was bent, jammed from the impact. The girl was sobbing quietly now, her eyes locked on his face, like he was the only real thing in the world. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm while his fingers worked the metal. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma, that's pretty. I'm Jake. I'm gonna get you out of here, okay? I promise." Promises. He'd learned not to make them. Promises got people killed. But looking at Emma's face, he meant it with every fiber of his being. The buckle finally gave. Jake grabbed the girl and pulled her through the window, shielding her head with his hand. The moment she was clear, he backed away from the car, cradling her against his chest. She weighed nothing. She felt like every responsibility Jake had ever run from in his life. The good Samaritan who'd stopped was on his phone, talking rapid fire to emergency services. Jake could hear sirens in the distance already, growing louder. 2 minutes away, maybe 3. The fire was spreading faster now, smoke pouring from the sedan in thick black columns. Jake set Emma down gently on the grass, beyond the shoulder. She immediately wrapped her arms around his leg, refusing to let go. He looked down at her, this tiny person who'd just lost everything, and something cracked inside his chest. "Emma, where do you live? Do you have family?" She just cried harder, her small body shaking. The sirens were closer now. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with his free hand. A text from Dagger, the club's sergeant-at-arms. "Church tonight, mandatory, big vote. Be there, church, club business." The world he'd lived in for 12 years, calling him back. Jake looked at the approaching lights, red and blue painting the highway in law enforcement colors. Every instinct told him to get back on his bike and ride. Emma was safe. Emergency services were seconds away. His job here was done. But Emma's grip on his leg only tightened. She looked up at him with those wide, terrified eyes, and Jake Morrison realized with absolute clarity that leaving her now would be the most cowardly thing he'd ever done. The first responders arrived in a controlled chaos of vehicles and personnel. Firefighters tackled the burning car with extinguishers. Paramedics descended on Emma with practiced efficiency. But she screamed when they tried to take her from Jake. Screamed like they were tearing her apart. "She's in shock," one of the EMTs said. A woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair. "Sir, are you family?" "No," Jake said. "I just pulled her out. She's bonding with you." Trauma response. "Sir, would you be willing to ride with her to the hospital, just until we can locate relatives? It might help keep her calm." Jake looked at Emma, then at his motorcycle sitting on the shoulder, then at the police officer approaching with a notebook. Everything in his life, everything he'd built, telling him to say no, to walk away, to protect himself in the club. Emma reached up and grabbed his hand with both of hers. Jake heard himself say. "Yeah, I'll go with her." The ambulance doors closed behind them with a finality that felt like a coffin lid. Through the rear windows, Jake watched his Harley disappear into the distance as they pulled away. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Dagger. "Where the hell are you?" Jake turned off his phone and held Emma's hand as the paramedics worked, knowing with absolute certainty that he'd just made an enemy of everyone he'd ever called brother. The hospital was a fluorescent nightmare of waiting rooms and questions. Emma had a concussion, cuts, bruises, but nothing life-threatening. Her parents hadn't been so lucky. The police confirmed what Jake had already known, both dead on impact. Emma was an orphan now, though she didn't understand that yet. In her mind, Mommy and Daddy were just somewhere else. And this scary place with the bright lights was temporary. Jake sat in a plastic chair that was too small for his frame, his leather cut attracting stares from everyone who passed. His arms were bandaged where the glass had cut him. His phone, turned back on, was exploding with messages. The Iron Skulls were looking for him. Church had started without him. A mandatory vote without the VP present was grounds for discipline. A social worker appeared, a tired-looking woman named Carol with a clipboard and sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd seen too many Emmas, too many Jakes. "Mr. Morrison," she said, sitting across from him. "Thank you for staying with Emma. You probably saved her life." "Anyone would have done it," Jake said, the words automatic. "But you did do it." Carol glanced at her clipboard. "We're trying to locate next of kin. Emma's mother has a sister in Oregon. We've left messages. In the meantime, Emma will need to go into emergency foster care." Jake looked through the window of the examination room, where Emma sat on a bed too big for her, clutching a stuffed bear a nurse had given her. She was staring at the door, waiting for him. "What happens to kids in foster care?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd been one of those kids, shuffled from home to home, until he aged out of the system straight into the streets. Carol's professional smile slipped for just a moment. "We do our best. The system is overwhelmed, but Emma will be placed somewhere safe." Safe! Jake had heard that promise before. It was a lie more often than not. "Can I say goodbye?" he asked. Of course. Emma's face lit up when Jake entered the room. She reached for him immediately, and he sat on the edge of the bed. This giant of a man with scarred knuckles and prison tattoos, beside this tiny girl with her whole broken life ahead of her. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. "I have to go now." Her face crumpled. "No, don't go. Please don't go. Emma, listen. These nice people, they're going to take care of you. They're going to find your aunt, and everything's going to be okay. I want you to stay." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm scared." Jake's throat tightened. He'd faced down rival clubs armed with knives and guns. He'd stood in front of judges who wanted to bury him in a cell for life. But this little girl's tears were breaking him in ways violence never could. His phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. And again. Finally, he answered. Dagger's voice exploded through the speaker before Jake could even speak. "Where the hell are you, Reaper? You missed church. Bishop's losing his mind. Says you violated code, and I got no defense for you, brother. None." Bishop, the current president of the Iron Skulls, a man who'd built his reputation on ruthless enforcement of club rules. Missing a mandatory church was a votable offense. Helping cops was a death sentence. "I got caught up in something," Jake said quietly, too aware of Emma listening to every word. "Caught up? We're your brothers. We're your family. You don't get caught up in something more important than us. Get back here now before this gets ugly." Jake looked at Emma, at her hopeful, terrified face, at the physical representation of every child he'd once been, alone and afraid, in a system designed to process rather than protect. "I can't," he said. Silence on the other end. "Then what did you just say?" "I said I can't. I'm dealing with something, and I'll be back when I'm back." Reaper listened to me very carefully. Dagger's voice had gone cold, deadly serious. "You're on thin ice. Whatever you're into, drop it. Bishop's already talking about stripping your patch. Don't make this worse. Tell Bishop I'll be there tomorrow. I need tonight." "For what?" Jake looked at Emma, who was watching him with an expression too old for her years. "Too knowing. For something that matters." He hung up before Dagger could respond. Carol returned with paperwork and apologies. Foster placement was ready. A couple in the suburbs, experienced, background checked. Emma would be picked up within the hour. Jake could leave any time, but he didn't leave. He stayed while they processed paperwork. He stayed while Emma ate a sad hospital dinner she didn't touch. He stayed when the foster parents arrived. A nice couple with concerned faces and gentle voices who promised Emma everything would be fine. Emma refused to let go of Jake's hand. "Sir," the foster father said gently, "it might be easier if you just stepped away. She needs to start bonding with us, easier." The word made Jake want to break something, but the man was right. Jake couldn't stay forever. He was a biker, an outlaw, a man with the Iron Skulls patch burned into his identity. He wasn't father material. He wasn't hero material. He was just a guy who'd made a choice on a highway and was now paying the price. He knelt down to Emma's level, taking both her hands in his. "Emma, I need you to be brave now. Braver than you've ever been. These people, they're going to take care of you until your aunt gets here. You're going to be safe. Will you come visit me?" she asked, her voice so small it barely registered. Jake's mouth opened. He should say no, should make a clean break, should tell her the truth that this was goodbye, that he was just a stranger who'd happened to be in the right place at the right moment. Instead, he heard himself say, Yeah, I'll come visit." It was the second promise he'd made that day, and this time he had no idea how he'd keep it. Emma finally let go, transferring her grip to the foster mother's hand with obvious reluctance. She looked back at Jake as they led her away, her eyes holding a question too big for words. Why is everyone leaving me? Jake stood in that hospital hallway long after they'd gone, his hands in his pockets, his heart doing something it hadn't done in years. Feeling. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Bishop himself, "Tomorrow, church, don't be late. We're voting on your future." Jake Morrison walked out of that hospital knowing he was heading into war, not with bullets and bikes, but something far more dangerous. A war between the man he'd been and the man he might still become. The Iron Skulls clubhouse sat on the outskirts of town like a fortress, surrounded by high fences and watchful eyes. Jake rode through the gates just after sunset, the sky bleeding purple and red. His brothers were already there, bikes lined up like tombstones waiting. He walked through the door into a room full of men he'd fought beside, bled beside, loved like blood. Their faces were stone. Bishop sat at the head of the table, his eyes cold as winter. Dagger stood against the wall, arms crossed, refusing to meet Jake's gaze. "Sit," Bishop commanded. Jake took his usual seat, the VP chair at Bishop's right hand. It felt wrong now, like sitting in someone else's grave. "You missed church," Bishop began, his voice deceptively calm. "Mandatory church, which means you violated code. You also turned off your phone when brothers were trying to reach you. You also, according to our sources, spent yesterday evening at a hospital cooperating with police and medical personnel. Want to explain yourself?" Jake could feel 20 pairs of eyes on him. He could lie. Could spin some story about bike trouble, about being out of range. But looking at these men, his brothers, he realized he was done lying. "I pulled a kid out of a burning car," he said simply. She was scared. She had nobody. "I stayed with her until foster services took her." The room erupted. Voices overlapping, angry, disbelieving. Bishop raised his hand and silence fell immediately. "You helped cops?" Bishop's voice was quiet, dangerous. I helped a little girl who was dying. Same difference. You got your face in police reports now. Your name in their system. You made us visible, made us vulnerable. For what? Some stranger's kid? She's 4 years old. I don't care if she's 4 months old. Bishop leaned forward. You broke code. The club comes first, always. You know this. You've enforced this rule yourself. Remember Tiny? Remember what happened when he talked to cops about his son's custody case? You voted to exile him. You stripped his patch personally, Jake remembered. He remembered Tiny's face, the betrayal in his eyes. He remembered believing he was doing the right thing, protecting the club. Funny how different things looked from the other side. Bishop, Dagger interjected carefully. Maybe we should consider the circumstances. Reaper didn't seek out the cops. He just helped someone in an emergency. Doesn't matter, Bishop snapped. The code doesn't have exceptions. The moment we start making exceptions is the moment we fall apart. We're either Iron Skulls or we're not. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Jake looked at the faces around him, seeing the fear beneath the anger. They weren't mad because he'd helped a child. They were mad because he'd reminded them they were human, that the code they lived by might be wrong, and admitting that meant questioning everything. So what happens now? Jake asked quietly. Bishop stood, towering over the table. We vote. VP Patch gets stripped regardless. Question is whether you stay in the club at all. Whether you're our brother or an exile. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. An exile wasn't just losing a patch. It was losing identity, family, purpose. It was becoming a ghost, marked as a traitor to anyone who knew the tattoos and scars. Some exiles ended up dead within months, targets of their former clubs or rivals who saw easy prey. Before we vote, Bishop continued, anyone got anything to say in Reaper's defense? Silence. Jake looked at Dagger, his closest friend in the club, but Dagger's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. One by one his brothers turned away, not from cruelty but from survival. To defend him was to risk their own standing. The code demanded unity, even when unity meant sacrifice. Then we vote, Bishop said. All in favor of full exile, show of hands. Arms went up. Not all of them, but enough. More than half. Jake counted them with a strange sense of detachment, like watching his own execution from a distance. Motion carries. Bishop reached out his hand. The cut, Reaper. Jake stood slowly. He looked at the leather vest hanging on his shoulders, the patches he'd earned through blood and loyalty. The skull with iron crossbones. The VP rocker. The state bottom rocker. 12 years of his life stitched into leather and thread. He started to remove it, then stopped. Before I hand this over, I want to say something. Bishop's eyes narrowed. Make it quick. I joined this club because I had nothing, Jake said, his voice steady. No family, no purpose, no reason to keep breathing. You gave me all that. You gave me brothers and a code to live by. You gave me pride in something, even if the world didn't understand it. I would have died for any man in this room without hesitation. He paused, looking at each face. But yesterday I realized something. The code we live by, it's supposed to make us stronger. It's supposed to protect us from the chaos out there. But what happens when the code becomes the chaos? When following it means losing the last piece of humanity we have left. The code is all we have, Bishop shot back. Without it, we're just criminals on bikes. Maybe, Jake conceded. Or maybe we're men who get to choose every single day whether we're going to be monsters or something better. That little girl, Emma, she didn't care about codes or colors or any of it. She just needed someone to not let her burn. And if being Iron Skulls means I should have let her burn, then maybe I don't want to be Iron Skulls anymore. The room went dead silent. What Jake had just said was heresy, blasphemy against everything they believed. But he saw it in some of their eyes. Doubt. The smallest flicker of recognition that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The cut, Bishop repeated. His voice hard. Jake removed the vest and laid it on the table, felt its weight leave his shoulders, and didn't feel lighter, felt emptier. He pulled off his rings, his VP pendant, everything that marked him as an Iron Skull, placed them beside the cut like offerings on an altar. You're out, Bishop declared. As of now, you're not our brother. You're nobody. You speak about club business, you die. You wear those colors again, you die. You approach a brother in public, you die. Understand? I understand. Then get out. Jake turned toward the door, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. He was halfway there when a voice stopped him. Wait, everyone turned. It was Dagger, stepping forward from the wall. His face was conflicted, torn between fear and something that might have been respect. Bishop, Dagger said carefully, exile might be harsh. Reaper screwed up, but he's been loyal for 12 years. Maybe suspension, probation. You defending him? Bishop's eyes went cold. You want to join him? Dagger hesitated. Jake saw the moment of choice play out on his friend's face, saw loyalty war with self-preservation. No, Dagger finally said, stepping back. No, I'm not defending him. Something died in Jake's chest at those words, but he couldn't blame Dagger. The system was designed exactly for this, to make standing together impossible, to enforce obedience through isolation. Jake walked out of the clubhouse into the night. Behind him, the door slammed shut with finality. He stood beside his Harley, this machine that had been his companion for over a decade, and for the first time in his adult life, had absolutely no idea where to go. His phone rang. A known number. Hello? Mr. Morrison. It was Carol, the social worker. I'm sorry to call so late, but there's been a development with Emma. Her aunt in Oregon, she's refusing to take her. Says she has her own kids, can't handle more. We're moving Emma to a state facility tomorrow. State facility. Jake knew those places. Overcrowded, underfunded, where broken kids got more broken until they aged out or ran away. A state facility. That's the best you can do. Mr. Morrison, we're doing everything we can, but Emma is now a ward of the state. Unless a family member steps forward or someone petitions for emergency foster placement. Our options are limited. Jake stood there in the parking lot of his former clubhouse. His cut gone, his brothers lost, his entire identity stripped away. A smart man would hang up, would walk away, would rebuild his life somewhere far from the wreckage. But standing there in the darkness, Jake realized something that changed everything. For 12 years, he'd defined family as the men who wore the same colors. He'd believed brotherhood was earned through violence and loyalty to a code written by ghosts. But family, real family, wasn't about blood or colors or ancient codes. It was about showing up, about staying, about being there when someone needed you, even when it cost you everything. What would it take, Jake asked quietly, for me to petition for emergency foster placement? Silence on the other end. Then, Mr. Morrison, are you saying you want to foster Emma? Yeah, he said, surprising himself with how sure he sounded. Yeah, I am. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood in the kitchen of a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, making breakfast for a 7-year-old girl who'd become his entire world. Emma sat at the table, coloring a picture of a motorcycle with a rider that looked suspiciously like Jake. The transition hadn't been easy. There'd been background checks, home visits, psychological evaluations. A former biker trying to foster a traumatized child raised every red flag in the system. But Carol had advocated for him, and somehow, miraculously, it had been approved. Emergency placement that turned into temporary custody, that was slowly becoming something more permanent. Emma had nightmares. Jake had nightmares. They helped each other through them. Emma was terrified of cars. Jake taught her that fear was okay, that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but showing up despite it. Emma cried for her parents. Jake held her and let her cry, never promising it would stop hurting, only promising he'd be there while it did. The Iron Skulls kept their distance. Jake saw former brothers occasionally, crossing the street to avoid him, eyes forward, pretending he didn't exist. Dagger called once, drunk, apologizing and cursing in equal measure. Jake told him it was okay. And it was. You don't choose family by holding on to people who won't hold back. You choose it by finding the ones who will. Jake got a job at an auto shop, working on cars instead of bikes. The pay was less, the hours longer, but he was home for dinner every night. He traded leather and chrome for parent-teacher conferences and bedtime stories. He traded the roar of a Harley for the sound of a little girl laughing. Some nights he missed the road, missed the brotherhood, the simplicity of the code, the clear lines between loyalty and betrayal. But then Emma would call out for him from her room, scared of shadows, and he'd realize that this was brotherhood. This was loyalty. This was the code that actually mattered. "Jake?" Emma asked one morning, setting down her crayon. She called him Jake, not Dad. Maybe someday that would change. Maybe not. It didn't matter, yeah, kiddo? "Thank you for saving me." Jake set down the spatula and crouched beside her chair, eye level. "Emma, you got it backwards. You saved me," she smiled. That beautiful, unguarded smile of a child who'd been broken and was learning to be whole again. Then she went back to coloring, and Jake went back to burning pancakes, and outside the window the world kept turning. They say the road reveals who you really are. For Jake Morrison, formerly known as Reaper, the road had revealed that he was never meant to be a ghost, a reaper, a harbinger of death. He was meant to be something harder, something braver, a father, a guardian, a man who chose to stay when every instinct told him to run. And in the end, that made him the kind of hero nobody expected, least of all himself. True brotherhood isn't found in matching patches or ancient codes, but in the courage to choose compassion over convenience, humanity over hierarchy, and love over loyalty to systems that demand we sacrifice our souls to belong. Sometimes being a hero means losing everything you thought defined you to discover who you were meant to be all along.